And it might. Or it might take place in millions of different machines owned by hundreds of thousands of different people and organizations. The key is to get the standards and the infrastructure to tie it all together. So, that moves to Act 3, probably the part you're most interested in, or at least the part that might be of most use to you and your companies. And that is, what's the future of the domain name system? Let me start by talking about a few myths. I've been involved in this business for 20 years, and one thing that's been fascinating is to see how much attention the domain name system and ICANN have gotten. Among my jobs at IBM was working with ICANN and managing a team that went to ICANN meetings and ensured that IBM's interests were represented. But I also managed a team that worked on the Internet Engineering Task Force, which was setting the fundamental standards for the Internet. And I could never understand why there were so many articles about ICANN and so much debate and so many meetings when actually the IETF is probably 3 or 4 times more important in the evolution of the Internet than ICANN. What goes on at Microsoft when they design the next version of the browser is probably even more important than what happens at the IETF. So it was funny that all this attention was focused on ICANN, but it is one of the few places that you can point to and say, these people are making decisions that impact the entire Internet, and you can find out what the decisions are, because it's an open, transparent process. A second myth about the DNS is that people really do need domain names to find what they want. 10 years ago, that was more or less the case. People really did use domain names. They didn't have powerful search engines. They weren't used to trying other things. But today, as we know, more and more people just use their bookmarks or they use search engine. And in the future, when we're not just looking for web pages, but we're looking for our dog or for sensors or for online resources like software, we're going to have other systems, other things that will get us to what we want. The last myth is that the DNS is somehow a fixed system and that that's going to be the answer for all time. And I think we again have to think outside the box. We have to realize the Internet and the DNS are going to evolve. We're not sure how, but we shouldn't just assume that what we have today is going to be what we have in the year 2015. Right now we are at a critical phase in the development of the Internet. One reason I say that is because we are right now developing key systems for identifying resources in the cloud. A really big piece of that is new online authentication systems. And how this works out is going to determine who has more control in the next phase of the net and what kind of applications we can develop. So Microsoft CardSpace, OpenID, the Liberty Alliance, Shibboleth, these are all attempts to do a better job of authenticating individuals on the Internet and in the cloud. Another really important issue is how do we identify all these billions of RFID tags and sensors that are going to be connected to the net. We have the ONS, the Object Naming System, which has been proposed by the group responsible for RFID standards. That's going to be a bigger deal and involve more identifiers and more numbers than the domain name system. But almost nobody's talking about ONS right now. A lot of really important issues, though, that have to be resolved. Third area is the grid and identifying online resources, pieces of software, computing resources like servers and supercomputers. That has to be done in a secure and reliable and unique way. And the last area that's gotten very little attention but is already well along the way to developing a global infrastructure is in the area of document identifiers. Bob Kahn, one of the fathers of the Internet, has been the champion of the digital object identifier. Amazon has developed its own system for identifying books and documents, the Amazon Standard ID system. In the future, those are going to be very important and valid ways to find the information that you need online. And we need to be watching how they develop so that they're developed in a way that's open and transparent and interoperable and not dominated or controlled by a single company or a single group. So let me now move to the fourth act of this performance and talk a little bit about governments in the net. This is an area I know something about because I've spent 20 years working in government or with governments on government policy making that relates to the net. Just as we're at a critical phase in the development of the technology, I would argue we're at a critical phase in the development of policy. As the internet merges with telephone and broadcasting, governments are starting to realize they've got to rethink their entire telecommunications and IT policy structure. And that's resulted in a number of important meetings. This June, the OECD is having a meeting on the future of the internet economy in Seoul. This is the first ministerial level OECD meeting on information technology in 10 years. The last one was in Ottawa just at the start of the e-commerce boom. And that meeting was very instrumental because it prevented a lot of very stupid government action that would have stopped e-commerce in its tracks. Things like the infamous bit tax or attempts to put tariffs on downloads of software that went across national boundaries. A lot of really idiotic regulatory decisions, regulatory proposals were stopped because at that meeting it was made clear that e-commerce was a huge opportunity and yet it was just beginning and governments should not try to stand in the way. So we're at a point where we're starting this next phase of cloud computing and governments again have the chance to screw it up really badly. Unfortunately, now we have hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars at stake. At the time of Ottawa, it was a few $billion. So now there are even more forces interested in influencing the course of the development of the IT infrastructure of the globe. We also have had the World Summits on the Information Society and 2 Internet governance forums, which you'll hear about more. These, again, were places where governments came together to get a better understanding of Internet policy and technology. So a lot of different action, a lot of governments grappling with these issues, trying to understand what's happening. They're trying to understand how to manage the Internet, how to, in some cases, how to control it or restrict it. The Chinese certainly have been the biggest example of that, but we have dozens of countries around the world trying to censor the Internet or trying to restrict services like Skype and voice over IP. It's not just international efforts. There's lots of individual national initiatives. This is a chart from Tony Rutkowski that tries to put on one page all of the different agencies and all of the different countries that are trying to do something. He has since updated it. It's now 3 slides long. Governments have lots of really important issues to deal with. Privacy and intellectual property protection at the top of the list, but there's also spam, pornography, security, pricing, consumer protection, lots of different issues. This is my list of the 10 P's of cyber policy. I doubt they translate into German as well, but these are issues we need to deal with in technology and in policy. So, another lesson I learned in Washington. Nothing more dangerous than an old model applied to a new medium. This is an old model. This is what you might call telephone governance from 40 years ago. In this world, you had hundreds of monopoly phone companies that were either owned by or controlled by their government. When there was need for international coordination, they went to the top. They went to the International Telecommunications Union in Geneva. And at the bottom were the subscribers. They weren't users. They were subscribers. Sort of like magazine subscribers. With a magazine, you have one choice. Subscribe or you don't. You don't get to decide what's in the magazine. With the telephone system 40 years ago, you had one choice. Yes, no. Because the company decided what you had, what service you got.